This is Scott McLeod. Welcome to the very first side conversation at Silver Lining for Learning. I'm joined here by my co-host, Punya Mishra. Punya and I are two of the primary hosts of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm an associate professor of educational leadership at the University of Colorado, Denver. Punya.
Hi, good morning. I'm Punya Mishra. I'm Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, and excited to have this new initiative, which is a spin-off. So the show is big enough now that the studios have agreed to a spin-off in its very first season.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah.
So if our other colleague joins us today, we're going to have 4 of our loyal friends who have been listening to multiple episodes of Silver Lining for Learning come share with us their thoughts and reflections on what they've been hearing, ideas around how to implement and turn this into practice in their local settings and so on. So let's do some intros and we'll just get rolling. Anne, you want to start?
Hey, hi everybody, I'm Anne. I'm a primary school teacher in London, in East London. I've been a primary school teacher for 20-something years now, in various parts of the world, but now in East London, and really enjoying the conversations from Silver Lining.
Cool, thanks Anne. Maureen?
I'm Maureen Milton. I teach high school English in Portland, Oregon at a Jesuit school, and I teach sophomores and seniors, and I finished my last paper last night at about 8:30. My last truant finally turned in his final outline, so I feel so liberated right now.
That's awesome. Gerald?
My name is Gerald Fussell. I serve as the principal of a middle school in the Comox Valley in British Columbia. I've sort of taught K to 12, been in administration for the last 15 or so years, and basically try to improve the learning for all kids has been my mantra.
I love it. 3 different countries reflecting our goal to reach a worldwide audience, Punya. We're doing all right so far.
It's fascinating because, Maureen reached out to me after the first one, and we've been talking every 2 weeks on the phone, and we just sit down and just chat. There's no agenda, there's nothing. It's been great. So I'm just glad that here we are. So thank you guys for joining.
I love it. I love it. All right. So friends, you keep coming back week after week. You listen to us blabber about stuff and you listen to our guests. So what's in your heads? What's resonating with you right now? What are you hearing that makes sense to you or inspires you?
I don't mind taking that one first. I came across Silver Lining through Dangerously Irrelevant and the blog, and that has been a huge part since coming back to the UK about 5 years ago now. A lot had changed in that short time. I'd been away for 4 years, and the increase in pressure from high stakes testing was phenomenal. Plus then this need to bring in technology and it being irrelevant, then moving on to the crisis now, and the conversations where every week we're given a glimmer of hope of how things could be. So when the final one was, what are we going to do next? How are we going to ensure these are not just conversations that we have on a Saturday night and something comes of it, is sort of the burning passion for me, that if this crisis is not going to change something, or at least change some of our actions and some of our actions for improving the lives of children, then what will? And that's really where my starting point is.
Go ahead, Maureen.
I guess I was drawn to, I've seen Yang Zhao speak. He was at U of O for a while, and kind of followed him, and I think that's how I got sort of dialed into the silver lining thing. And I think I was just sort of drawn to the title because in the middle of all of this, I just felt so desperate, and overwhelmed, and I've always sort of been, I was a K-8 librarian for 10 years in a school that had no technology, but 26 acres and a creek and woods. And I've largely worked outside of a testing environment. Like, I've not worked at schools like that have required testing. Our students take AP, and my current students take AP classes and do all sorts of all intergalactic, like we're number one all the time. But I was certainly drawn by the idea of silver lining, because I work in a pretty traditional school, and it's a Jesuit school, so it has an old history. And then I worked there actually at the school where I work now. I just finished my 6th year, but I actually worked there from 89 to 96. So I worked there when it was all boys, about less than half the size it is now. It was a very different institution. And so I had an 18-year hiatus, and I came back, and it was, there were still a lot of things we were still doing, and there were a lot of good changes, and there were a lot of things like, wow, this is still 1990. And so I was drawn to the idea that that this could be an opportunity to shake things up and maybe rattle out, like, maybe 55 minutes of lecture 4 times a week isn't exactly how things could go. And I think that, so it's been really, it's certainly been lots of rich conversation. I'm also, and Punya knows this, I'm teaching a new class in the fall, so that's been kind of like my middle burner. And then I just have long been a student of institutions. I think the history of education and the history of schools is fascinating, and this feels like a momentous minute. And so I sort of am curious about how that will, being in the midst of it. I'm less attuned to, like, the calculus of the curve as I am education.
Thank you. It sounds like somewhat similar trajectories. It's interesting. I came into education not because I was inspired by positive, because I was de-inspired by the damage that public education can do. And I came to it late. I came to it as my second, third career. So I've constantly been looking at it. How can we improve? How can we better meet the needs of kids as we come through? And while we've made incremental changes, not nearly as much as I think we could have and need to make. The sort of the catchphrase that sticks in my head is, when will what we know change what we do? And unfortunately, we know a lot. We've got a lot of really positive research, but it doesn't change what we do. In British Columbia, we've spent a lot of time with a lot of really good thinkers coming up with a totally redesigned curriculum that really puts core competencies, if you will, your non-cognitive skills at the foundation of it, takes away a lot of the finite content, the Google content, if you will, and puts competencies at the forefront. That should dramatically change the way we do things. I can't remember how far into this we are. I think, primary was the first to adopt it, and it fit really well for them because they actually already do a lot of that, especially the SEL work. Then there was sort of middle, and then secondary, not surprisingly, is sort of being the hardest to try to convert to the opportunity. So when the pandemic happened, so I guess before I get there, so all the way through, and we know, and I think one of your guests, actually, I think it was Chris, probably identified it specifically, taking a look at, it was Rod Allen, who was one of the architects of our system as well, identified that we've been trying to get innovation in education, either changing pedagogical approaches, regrouping of adults, regrouping of learners, or the regrouping of learning, or rescheduling of learning. And all of a sudden, overnight, all 4 of those happened. So here's a heck of an opportunity where things we've been trying to do for years and years and years have happened. And I think it was Dr. Kim who said, he feels the irony of it, right? You've got this great opportunity that you want to capitalize on. You're almost afraid the opportunity is going to end too soon, but you want it to end soon, and so you've got that pull. So I was drawn to the silver lining of learning. Spoke to me because, okay, I'm a huge fan of, you make what you get. right? Here's an opportunity, how can we capitalize on the opportunity rather than quit, rather than fail, rather than not? So how can we capitalize on this opportunity to actually use it as a catalyst to move education forward? So that's one of the reasons I originally tuned in, and that's one of the reasons I've kept tuning in and drawing in other things. Like Rod's got a conversation going as well. And luckily some of the coursework I'm doing now is moving into this area too, so.
Awesome, thank you, you all. So looks like John is connecting to us. And so John, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We'll give him a minute. John, can you hear us?
Yes, can you? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So this is a wonderful time for you to introduce yourself real quick, and then I'm going to chime in on what I just heard from our other friends.
Okay, it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous here. I'm John. I'm from Ireland. I'm working in further education at the moment in a kind of a ed tech role. I worked in Albemarle County in Virginia for 3 years, so that's how I kind of in tune with a whole lot. So I kind of, wherever Pam's doing, I follow.
Okay.
So yeah, I've been working kind of ed tech now for a few years. I used to work for a government agency, doing the same jobs I'm kind of doing now. So I've done a fair bit of stuff over the years. So
Pam and Ira are really close friends, so it's great to meet you.
Yeah, I always think I know a lot of people, and then I figure out who Pam Moran knows and realize that my world is small in comparison.
She is network supreme.
So cool. So now we've got our full complement of friends for today. Thank you, everybody. So Gerald, I want to follow up on one thing that you just said here at the end, because you saw me stand up and grab some books from my bookshelf. So, the primary hosts of Silver Lining for Learning are all instructional technology backgrounds, except for me. I'm a leadership guy. And so there's this sort of running gag where I'm always talking about systems, right? And systems of change. And so when you say things like, when is what we know going to inform what we do, that immediately, of course, raises flags for me. So one of the best books that I can recommend for anybody who's interested in systems change is this book called The Knowing Doing Gap, right? Which has a corporate lens to it, but is really good for any kind of organization. It talks about why do we have these gaps between what we know we should be doing and what we're actually doing, right? And then, I think the other thing that really resonated with me from this book, Execution, is this concept that even when we know what to do, it's our poor implementation skills and organizational execution that gets in the way of us actually doing it, right? And so those two books have been books that have spoken strongly to me over the years. And then, of course, there's the classic Diffusion of Innovations book by Rogers, which everybody knows because of the early adopter, late majority laggards curve, the bell curve that everybody seems to know. At least a lot of people do. But the other thing that Rogers talks about in this book, which has not gotten near as much attention, besides this concept of innovators and early adopters, is this concept of what he called perceived characteristics of innovations, right? And the idea of that is that whether or not an innovation takes off in our system, the kinds of stuff that we've been talking about in Silver Lining for Learning, has to do with the mindset of the potential adopters and how they view that innovation, right? So in other words, do they see that innovation as being better than the thing it's supposed to replace? Do they have a chance to try it out? Or does it feel like it's going to be really difficult? Are the results of that innovation visible to other people as they try to make their own decisions, right? Like there's all this mental work that's happening around the innovation that I think we don't think about enough as leaders of systems where we're trying to put stuff into place. So, just some initial thoughts here for us to chime in on. And Gerald, maybe you want to just come right back with your comment here.
Well, as you're speaking, one of the challenges, especially in education, is context and how many competing stakeholders we have. So when you say who is the they, well, it's on the one hand, okay, the students, quite frankly, in a lot of ways are the easiest to convince because they recognize it's being done to them. One of the toughest groups to convince are the parents. right? Teachers in a lot of ways, and and getting to critical mass, my experience is getting to critical mass, they can get it, especially if they can see the why, right? I mean, I'm Simon Sinek, right? Classic, if they can see the why, it's pretty easy to get teachers there. They want to do the best they can. They're awesome at what they do. Generally, it's the parents and politicians sometimes, and quite frankly, leadership, right? Because you have to be prepared to take on those battles. You have to be able to prepare to take on, and I mean mindfully, right? We have a lot of examples where people have really good ideas, horrible execution, right? And that those are your a lot of those competing interests.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what we're not going to do is we're not going to replace a one-size-fits-all model with a new one-size-fits-all model, right? Like, we have to recognize the pluralities that exist within our communities and within our student bodies, and then figure out how do we facilitate multiple pathways to get there.
Okay, but I think, just sort of, and then Maureen, I'd love to hear what Maureen has to say, but I think you're missing one key element. Yes, we have the plurality of the students, but also the plurality of our educators. Right? Because the capacity is massive. And so we have to meet them where they're at as well. Sorry, Maureen.
Maureen?
I was particularly impressed by Sean Loescher, the guy that was a couple weeks ago, I think. The thing that kind of resonated with me, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm in this older institution, and I work with lots of experienced teachers who are reluctant to, I've always done it this way. We've always done it that way, as like, that's their pedagogical strategy, right? Like, we've always done it this way. And so so we've had this great shakeup to sort of have, and I still have colleagues who are literally giving time tests over Canvas and, are delivering lectures, and that's their speed, right? I think Loescher's posture of encouraging his teachers to take risks and encouraging them to fail and to not feel, I kind of have this belief that most teachers are inherently conservative, not in the sort of, like lowercase c, that you go into teaching because you know the schedule. I like basketball. I might eat the same lunch every day. You're just a conservative nature. You may not go into teaching because you want to shake stuff up. You might go into teaching because you want to, sorry about the sideshow here. You might go into teaching in the joys. He's got like an apartment up at the top of the van. I'm in a van, by the way, John. Not because I live in it down by the river, but because it's my office. And, but I think this idea that, that again, how do we get maybe an inherently conservative body of people to take a risk, move past, like, I've always done it this way, and I think, here's the chance. And Scott, the books you suggested looked awesome, but I know I'm not going to read them. And when I was in grad school for teaching, I swear to God, the drumbeat of grad school reading was, this is an article that someone just writ large, right? Like, this is an article, and somebody needed to publish, and so now it's 700 pages of, and I don't dispute, like, especially the diffusions and innovations, that this guy is extrapolating his worthy construct. But as a person in education, and I don't have any stake at a certain level. I just teach high school. I'm not an administrator. I've been an administrator, but I feel like I have to sort of, like, I've always been, like, when I came back, I had a colleague who was an alum of the school who was like, great, Maureen, you're back to stir the pot. I was like, yes, I am. And so, I'm curious about, yes, parents are also conservative because this is your one kid or your two kids or your how many kids, and you don't want anybody risking them. But I think too, how do we get, teachers to sort of say, I'm going to try this. It's probably going to suck, or, but like, it's just, the Red Cross, do no harm.
So if I can jump in here. So it's interesting, Scott, like in the group of the original Silver Lining, I've always seen myself as a designer who happens to be in education. And what's been the biggest shift for me is, like, when I was at Michigan State 18 years there, all my work was with teachers, and realizing that there are structural and systemic issues which need to be designed or redesigned or reimagined before, you know, the teachers can have an opportunity to do what it is that they want to do. I think teachers are not conservative with a small c or whatever we want to call it. It's the systems within which we function. So I have this new piece out where I can drop the link once I dig it out, where, I don't know if you know about this, there was this GM car factory which was like this complete disaster. Like, people were actually deliberately creating bad cars. There was drugs on the shop floor, what have you. And what's interesting is that that same car company ended up in 3 years being one of the best manufacturers of cars, with people taking incredible pride in their work, with 80% or 85% of the same workforce. And what had changed was the systems which recognized what they did, which, you know, which allowed for, innovation and change at the level of individuals, of managers and workers being sort of on the same shop floor, you know, all kinds of structural changes. And that story sort of was very insightful for me, because it spoke to, so that's why, you know, Gerald, the points that you're making, or the point that, Maureen, you made about, let's say, Sean Lesher, who had, you know, our guest a couple of weeks ago, or somebody like Pam Moran, I think what they are doing is they are rethinking the system. And what the system is, it's a structure of incentives, disincentives, it is ways of working, it is mindsets. And I think that's the only way change. So I'm a somewhat late comer to the sort of the systems in the organizational view, Scott. But I do approach that as a designer. It's like, these are human created things. We made this stuff up, and which means we can take it apart and put it together in new ways. And I think that's where sort of the leadership piece becomes so crucial, because you're not just providing a vision, but you're providing certain structural changes, which, you know, I mean, the human resistance to change is not a bad thing, because otherwise we'd be, you know, swinging in the breeze every moment, right? So how do you find that balance? So I don't think teachers are conservative, or anybody's conservative for bad reasons. They're conservative because they're like, at least I know this is some weird way it's going on. Who knows what's going to happen there? And it's only when we provide that vision and that structure that allows that new things to emerge and operate. And that's where I think the multiple pluralities, Gerald, that you talked about, becomes so important. Because it's not going to be one plurality of the kids. It's going to be plurality of the teachers. It's going to be plurality of the parents. I mean, so that's why each solution is contextualized within where it is. I think that's the other design thing which I think becomes really important, is that you're not design. You know, anyway, I'll stop now, but I think there's a whole bunch of issues here which thinking in terms of systems that I think changes the conversation in very productive ways, which otherwise you're stuck at the level of individuals and blaming individuals, which is sort of a lot of the conversation in education ends up being that. It's teachers are the problem, you know, leadership or whatever, right? I mean, testing is the, you know, no, it's the system overall within which all of us play these roles, which is predetermined. And unless we change that, our roles don't change. The way kids interact with us nothing changes unless we rethink that.
Right.
Can I just jump in here?
Go ahead, John.
Just kind of touch on the point you said about Pam. I left kind of Ireland, went straight over to Albemarle, and I'm back again teaching in Ireland. Well, I was teaching last year, now I'm kind of in a dead tech role. And this is probably similar to anybody in the UK as well, because like there's not a whole lot of difference in the way schools are run or devised or set up between Ireland and the UK. In the biggest thing that struck me, but there was a number of different things that struck me, but the biggest thing was there was vision. Pam had a vision, Ira had a vision. We knew where we were going. We had a mantra of what we were doing. We had the lifelong learning competencies. We had the 7 pathways. Where I'm working now is the equivalent of a school district, and I don't even know what our ethos is. The other thing about Albemarle is they hire great people. Great people want to work there, and I'm not saying that because I end up working there, but you're looking around you and you're seeing national award winners in their subject areas. Like Pam was down to the last 4 for Superintendent of the Year. Our CIO was Nationals COSEN Tech Director of the Year. Talent follows talent, but the thing about it is the thing that struck me, and I've been telling people here, is that like in Ireland, we don't have instructional coaches or EdTech coaches in schools. So you're burning up the energy of your creative, innovative teachers doing workshops on Microsoft Teams. Whereas in Albemarle, that was my job. We gave the platform to other teachers to do cool stuff. And it made those teachers happy. They were able to kind of do cool stuff that they were happy kind of getting kids involved in. But it came back to like the pan, like it was like we'd be talk about stuff and like VR or stuff like that, and there was no problem trying that out because like she had the mantra of get to yes, and like I've had a really frustrating day-to-day at work, literally before I came in, that's why I was late, and it's just a total different mindset. Like it comes down to if you have the right people leading with the vision, you will get people that follow that vision will join your school district. And Albemarle has been very lucky in that they've got a lot of great people wanting to work there because, okay, the UVA's there, they get the pick of the litter out of the MEDs there. We have people coming from all over other states to come to Albemarle, okay? And it's a lovely area to work and it's a great school district to work in, but there's a vision there. You know where you're going. You know what you're signing yourself up for. Like, I would have known IRA for about 7 or 8 years before I started in Albemarle. I knew what I was getting myself in for. I was going to be in an environment where I couldn't get it in Ireland. And like where I'm trying to work now, I came in with the vision, okay, this is going to be Albemarle in Nina, and it's not happening. And it's frustrating, but it's frustrating knowing that there's a better way. And like when you see the engagement of the kids, like even today now, a couple of teachers that work in Albemarle High School have a bakery channel on YouTube for the fun, just for the crack of it. That's why we enjoy working where you're working.
Yeah. So leadership matters. And the reason leadership matters is because leaders are the ones in charge of the systems, right? And so to echo Punya's point, you know, we've known for a long time from, you know, our organizational scholars that anytime you have trouble with an individual, about 95 to 98% of the origin of that challenge is the system in which that individual is embedded. And that's true for society, not just organizations, right? And you know, I think, John, we're referencing Albemarle County School District in Charlottesville, Virginia here. But what's important to recognize here is that the power of Pam Moran, former superintendent, and that work there is not that Pam had a vision, but that she was able to create a shared vision that was held by the organization and by the community, right? Because you can't just shove a vision down everybody's throats. You have to have that collective buy-in that makes it work. And I think that's really the primary lesson to learn from Albemarle County is that, you know, you can come in with some great ideas, but you have to have that collective ethos that you said, right? Where everybody's working together toward that vision rather than, you know, fighting against the system. So with all that said, Anne, you've got some thoughts.
Really just building on a lot of what's been said here already, and from the teacher's point of view in the classroom, in that, you know, I had 4 amazing years working with a leader who had the courage to trust us to bring his vision to life, and that gave us the freedom to try things out, which validated what he was trying to achieve within the school. And that was then seen in the children, that they had the courage to try things out. And I mean, those 4 years were heavenly. And I thought I could never get a better position. Then I returned to the UK into a federation. And I took on a class where they had had many, many different teachers the year before. They were labeled the troubled class. And I said, that's the class for me. And the only stipulation from the management team was, we just want you to stay and see a year through with them. And so because of that, I was almost given more license to do what I felt was right for this class, because they wanted me to stay. They wanted this class to have a good year. And therefore, within the UK system, I was granted that freedom to do what was right for that class. And so it was even better. But then I moved to a school where everything was ticking along nicely. And the last thing they wanted was somebody coming in with ideas to try or to change, because the exam results were fine. The Ofsted results were fine. So therefore, why change anything? The wolf was kept from the door, and yet it broke my heart, because these children believed that they were learning, but they weren't. They were going through processes where there was no spark, and there was no life, and there was no ownership. And the most troubled kids knew it, and they acted it, and they said it. But, you know, that was kind of swept to the side, and it was heartbreaking. So to now be back in an institution where the leader is saying, try that idea, maybe you'd like to talk to this person, it is such a relief. But it is true, there are many educators, it seems, who do not want to let go of the high stakes testing, because it's almost like if we serve that system and it's fine, then we've done our job, and nobody can come back to us and say you failed, because, well, it's the exam system. Yeah.
Actually, Scott, yeah, I think you have a question there. I think maybe the transition to that would be good. I would love to learn that. And I have a follow-up to that, which is basically, what's the mood like among your teachers and, you know, in your sort of school community, looking to the fall? You know, I mean, you guys came here because you saw the silver lining thing. And so clearly there is this there is an optimistic bent, or, you know, there is a willingness to sort of go in that direction. I'm just curious about what the mood is. But I think, Scott, you had a question here. If you want to go ahead and start that off, and then we can come into the looking to the mood part.
Yeah, well, they're related, right? So the question I threw in the chat that our viewers won't see is this idea that, you know, we're talking about a lot of big ideas in Silver Lining for Learning. We're also trying to provide some interesting examples from other places, right? Including contexts that may not match ours very well. And so I really want to take advantage of our, you know, friends here, you know, who are in implementation contexts to really think about how do we translate that into our local school context. You know, like, how do we take the stuff that we talk about each week and the stuff that's on the blog and turn it into local action? So what's your thinking around that?
Okay, go ahead, Maureen.
I think the thing that I noted when Anne was speaking, that you were talking about your previous employment as you were trusted to, you know, engage with the students, and sadly, because they were the lowest stakes student, or, you know, in your current position, your lowest stakes students, you're trusted to, because there's sort of this desperation, like, oh, you know, it couldn't be any worse, so go ahead. And this goes back to Loescher's sort of management style of, you know, I trust my teachers, and I think how to take these ideas that are sort of in the big picture, and then how do you filter them to on the ground work, relies on, and as you point out, Scott, and the systems thinking of, like, this needs to be a system that allows for falling down and then getting back up, even though we all feel charged by, you know, you would never want to let any one student pass by or slip through, or, you know, you want to do your very best by every child, and every parent wants the very best for every child, and so this feeling of experimentation has, you know, inherent risk. And so how do we buoy that risk to be, you know, how do I take, you know, where the Jesuits say, you know, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. And so sometimes you just kind of go ahead and, you know, you take the risk and, you know, hope, you know, and again, I'm not doing brain surgery, so their stakes are sort of lower, but at the same time, this is someone's child. This is a child. This is the future of my community. So I have high stakes. And I think, and it's, Scott, I feel like you mentioned at some point, you know, sort of how do we decouple testing, the whole, that's another separate monetary system that happens. And I've been sort of recused from it largely. But yeah, how do we, I've sent the silver lining thing to a ton of my colleagues. I know if I give my colleagues diffusions and innovations, they're not going to read it. So how, I try and cultivate my colleagues and be like, wow, this is really cool. What are you working on? This, like, tell me what's going on in your room, or, you know, like in a not, like, just that's collegial. As a student of institutions, you know, how somebody who's read all those books, you know, The School in Rose Valley, and, you know, all these charming books about people who have started schools, and having worked at schools that were young, having started a school myself, you know, there's a liberty in being able to just do what you want. Or when you're in a new school where the teachers are like, well, I guess you just need to write the curriculum. You're like, okay, I'll do that, you know. How do you take that new school flavor? We're starting, like, the same feeling you have as a new year. I'm gonna get this right this time. How do we infuse that in our classrooms? And you know, every, you know, Canvas module has that feeling. Sorry, I think I'm asking more questions than I'm answering.
That's the same for all of us. Go ahead, Anne or John. You guys want to go next?
Gerald, you can go. Go ahead.
There's all sorts rattling around, and I try to, as much as we can, take the 20,000 foot and try to make it as practical as we can. Sort of in my working, and I've been very clear with our staff, is by the end of June, we're going to have 3 plans. One's for full face-to-face, one's for hybrid, and one's for fully remote. And we're going to, that way in the fall, we can dial up and down as we need to for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, it doesn't matter. One of the things one of these things that just intrigued me was when we were told, because we were on spring break, when we were told, okay, you're not coming back to classrooms, we're going remotely. And we responded with way more resilience as a system than anyone thought we possibly could. And people did it. Interestingly, we're having way more pushback on people coming back into the schools and classrooms for face-to-face than we did going online. And I think there's an aha there that we need to capitalize on. The way I'm looking at it, there are sort of 5 key areas that I think that we need to focus on, that we've learned from the conversations, from what we've looked at. Number 1 is the need to focus on relationships, which has always been there, relationship, but I think we need to take that seriously and consciously. We had a huge advantage this time. We had our kids for 2/3 of the year to develop relationships before they went remote. We don't have that luxury for September, and we got to figure that one out. Number 2, focus on what's important and what is manageable, which is going to, there's a lot of conversation about how to do this. How is easy? I think the really deep conversations are going to be the what. What gets jettisoned when we have to trim down, when we do things differently? I'm thinking the exploratories, the electives, maybe some of the core subjects, right? When we're focusing on literacy and numeracy, to co-create meaningful learning experiences for our students and their families. Where we've had success is when we've done that co-creation as opposed to here's the worksheet electronically. I think we've really got to capitalize on that. Assessment needs to change, and it was interesting. I followed Will Richardson for years and years and years. I've used his work to guide a lot of what we've done in our school. I have never seen him more depressed than I did in the silver lining session. And one of the things that I really took out of there, and he hit it right on the head, until assessment changes, nothing else is going to change. And I think he's just been so beat down in the futility of that effort. But assessment needs to change from marks and grades for finished work to feedback and trials that promote growth and learning, especially performance-based assessments, and quit assessing for privilege. And then the 5th one that we're focusing on is developing a need to consciously develop leadership for times of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that's coming from what Sean said, you know, absolutely vision, like priorities, like what are your values? Once you're sure of your values, you can do everything. right? And that comes to what John was talking about in terms of that vision, that being able to live that vision, that co-created vision. But it's also having leadership in the place where they're not threatened, where their skin's not so thin that every challenge that comes to them, they panic and they react, to be proactive and allow the professionals to be professionals and do what they do. So those are sort of the 5 key areas we're going to be focusing on. The 2 big, one of the key things that we have found, and I really want to challenge secondary to change their model, is, and I'm going to brag a little bit, our school I find has been very successful for one key reason. Well, okay, there are a number, but one of the key reasons is right out of the gate, we had one teacher contacting the kids, and it was the homeroom teacher, and everything went through that teacher. So the platform stayed consistent, the messaging, that teacher worked with the parents, knew the kids, knew the parents. That homeroom teacher was the conduit to everything, whether it was extra support for the kid, whether it was extra, whatever it was, that one teacher. And I think that made a huge difference in how our families and our kids reacted and how our teachers did. And if secondary can figure out a way to do that, I think it's going to be gold. Elementary has a huge advantage again in that area. 2 key questions that I'm really going to be wrestling with over the next week or 2. We sent out a survey to our students, our staff, and our parents. We started it a week and a half ago. I'm going to go probably another week, and we've gotten incredible feedback from that in terms of what's working, what's not, and where we're going to go. 2 key questions that I really want to wrestle with. How do we know which kids are not performing? And that's a much bigger question than it sounds like. It's how are we measuring? How do we know? And Sean's talked about engagement. How do we measure that? But what are they actually doing? And how are they progressing? And then the other one, and this is the big one that if anyone can figure this, I think you've got a gold mine here, is how do we mitigate family home supports? How do we mitigate for that? Technology is easy, quite frankly. It's how do we mitigate for the home? That's all.
Anne or John, thoughts about translating the stuff we've been talking about at Silver Lining for Learning into practice? Anne?
Yeah, I would love to come back to Gerald just to ask, you said you were feeling pushback for bringing people back into school. Is that pushback from parents and families, pushback from teachers, pushback from children?
Yes. The reality, so Joe, just really quickly, so we've had, this is our 4th week now, so we sort of, a month ago, we started bringing in our most vulnerable learners. So small numbers, had about 10% of our student population. We serve a low socioeconomic community. We're middle school, 6 to 9. And of the kids we invited back, we got less than 50%. Some of it was parents, some of it was support, some of it was the kids, but not so much them. Initially, the teachers were really nervous and scared. As they got in and got settled, that dissipated. This week, we've started the next phase where we've basically I've got almost 30% of our 25% of our students in this week on varying schedules and things. Initially, there was anxiety. How do we do it? Provincially, there's a lot of pushback. How do we do home learning and face-to-face? And how do we do that? So there's actually been more pushback from teachers in that respect. Because how do we do this and not get overworked and overwhelmed? We just have to figure it out. So when you say, and now of the kids that the homeroom teachers have tried to bring back in, the kids that would benefit the most by being in, I'd have to talk to the teachers. I would say we're probably about 50% where parents aren't comfortable, and quite frankly, many of my kids run the house, right? Like if they don't want to go, they're not coming. Yeah. So it's parents, it is kids. Most of the teachers here are getting it, and the system we've got set up is working really well. Yeah. But it was also anxiety. How do I do all of this? And that overwhelming. Plus, for 3 months we've been saying, stay away from here. We're dangerous. Yeah. And now we've got that psychological, that psychosocial, emotional pieces to manage as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. One of the things that I found frustrating, and I haven't understood why, is that when all this happened and we went to home learning or distance learning, and we had that question of how do we reach the children who either don't have access to the technology or we feel don't have the parental or family supports in place there, was why don't we use the Australian model, or I worked in the Falkland Islands, that model where you simply pick up a phone and there are materials, paper materials at home and paper materials in school, and there's that relationship through the phone conversation. And I haven't understood why what the boundaries or the difficulties were in making that happen, other than I was given the safeguarding label that, oh, it's a safeguarding issue if you are one person on a phone to one child. And then I wondered, well, why do I have DBS clearance then? If I have not, you know, fulfilled the criteria for being a safe person to be working with children, and if I can't sit in an office where at least my side of the conversation can't be heard, I couldn't see what the problem was there for using that method to access harder to reach children. Yeah.
So to me, and John, I know but to me, these are sort of just classic examples of this distinction between like what John was talking about in terms of like what Pam said, that there is this vision, which is we have to reach the kids, we have to think about X, Y, and Z, as opposed to following processes, which at some level were designed with, I mean, every system that's there has been designed with the best of intentions. Usually people have good intentions when they come to creating schools and educational systems and so on. But I think what happens with these processes and all these, then they get in the way. They become proxies for what is the real thing. And I think that's where I think the clarity of vision makes a huge difference, because it allows you to ask questions like the one that you just asked, like, why do I have to do X? So John, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, please.
No, it's okay. Like in the Irish educational context at the moment is the way the Irish exam system works. We've one basically state board that's responsible for the state exams, and Irish students sit an exam at the end of equivalent of 12th grade and the equivalent of 9th grade, the Leaving Cert and Junior Cert results. So the Leaving Cert, which should have started yesterday, is kind of, you have 60,000 students doing it. It pretty much dictates what college they go to, because the way that the system works is that you get points for every grade that you get in your Leaving Cert, and that corresponds to points. And then the college courses will be advertised at, say, 400 points or 450 points. So you have to reach a certain amount of points to get into a course, which is quite fair, quite transparent. But the issue is that at the moment now, we have teachers that have to sit down and predict grades, whereas in Virginia, where I was, because they were tracking GPA, they were putting stuff into Power School. It's quite easy. You just hit a button and it will generate a number for you. Where in Ireland, we have teachers that will only do a Christmas test, a mock test in February, and then the Leaving Cert, because they don't teach any other way. And there's a lot of aggro going on about now, whether it be court cases where Johnny didn't get his whatever he wanted. But kind of the issue is we're now having a conversation about assessments and what it's for and what it's measuring, and what happens if this has to happen, if we have to do something that's not the Leaving Cert exam itself. And it's following through now within the other sectors, because like in the further education sector, there's people looking at, well, actually, I didn't get all my project work done. How are you going to grade that? Or I have still assignments due. Assessment is always going to be at the center of a lot of what we do in education, because it dictates the end result. And in Ireland, we're having a conversation about assessment that probably hopefully will have a positive impact on it. But again, there's a lot of people that are tied into the system as it is, and I just don't know. Like, to be honest, if I can come up with or find people that have the answer for assessment in these crazy times, I will listen to what they're talking about the whole time, because I think if we can figure out that, a lot of the other stuff is going to be easier to resolve.
One of the things that's fascinates me about some of these project-based learning schools or these inquiry-based schools is that the burden of assessment in deciding when a student has learned enough in a particular area falls to the student, not the system, which I think is phenomenal, right? I mean, because we keep talking about, lifelong learners, and how do you know when you're pursuing something if you've gotten what you needed? And to internalize that process to the students rather than externalizing it, I think is really powerful. And I understand that we have these state and national and local assessment systems, right? Because we want to make sure that there's a return on investment in the monies that we're spending on our youth and our education systems. but our kids don't own the assessment the way they should.
Right.
Because there's nothing that's internalized by them in the process. It's all something that's done to them, not
To them.
with them.
So just to add, I mean, yesterday I had this conversation, and that's, I think, Scott, I was going to talk to you about that being the next edition of the spin-off, and if you'd like to join me for that. So for the past 2 years, we've been working with the local school district and sort of reimagining what sort of a third, fourth grade classroom can and should be. So it's a long process of design, and, you know, lots of community members, lots of business association meetings, lots of kids brought into the conversation. So this school started in fall. It's called the Spark School. It's in a local school district. If you go to my blog, you can read about the entire thing. It was, I think, one of the proudest things that I have been a part of, right? And then COVID-19 hit, and like everything shut down. And the question I had was, which is sort of the question, Scott, you put on the chat here, which is, how did that system, which is a very different one from the rest of the school district, respond? Did it respond the same way? Did it fall back on, oh my God, this is a crisis, fine, let's go back to our tried and trusted ways? Or do we continue what we are trying to do here, which is the sort of team model of teaching, which is project-based learning, which is this, that, and the other? And so I had this conversation yesterday with sort of the lead educator designer and a couple of other people involved in it. And just out of curiosity, like, you know, what happened? And turns out that they actually pushed back against the district in some areas and said, we need to do this differently because our system is different. We interact with kids in a different way. The relationships are different. And so that's why I said, like, oh, it'll be great to have you guys as a part of this conversation, because what it showed to me was sort of, Gerald, the point you were making about resilience, you know, that the system, that people responded the right way. And so that speaks to me that there are certain system structures which actually are more resilient and flexible when it comes to crises like these, and others which just curl up and say, okay. I mean, it's the whole thing that came up in Sean's conversation, that there were districts which says, we're going to do no teaching because we can't meet a certain group, as opposed to sort of Sean's more value-driven framework, which is the first group I need to focus on are the ones who are the most disadvantaged, who are the hardest to get to. You know, and I think that I'm sort of hearing the same thing from you, Gerald, about the groups that you're bringing in, the 10% or whatever kids you're bringing in. You are starting with not the easiest ones. You're starting with the ones who might have been hurt the most because of this. And I think that's the other piece I think that I'm personally getting very, very sort of interested in, is these broader values and how they emerge.
The stakes are highest for those kids.
Absolutely.
And and I'll be really fast. That's why I just deked out here. One of our former students who was on his way out of school, we were able to personalize learning for him, kept him in school, and he's graduating this year. And I wanted to know how things had gone this year. And it was just awesome to see him. He was on his way to work.
Very cool. So this has been wonderful, and Punya, I have a feeling we might need to do this again. But
because I have the next one already set up with these people, and I'm waiting to hear from Mary, who's the lead lead educator designer of this new space in the school. And I already have invited her, so more to come.
Perfect. And Maureen, Gerald, John, thank you for being loyal friends of Silver Lining for Learning. It's really wonderful to put some faces with the names in our very hyperactive chats that we have on YouTube. And we're very appreciative of your willingness to spend some time with us today and talking. We will let you know when this is uploaded live, and you can relive all the glory again. And yeah, we'll chat again. So thank you very much, friends. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Take care of yourself.
Thank
Be
you all.
safe. Be good.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.